Hi, I'm Femi OK and you're in the stream. Today, can Iraq avoid a sectarian civil war? We look at the Sunni uprising and hear Iraqi views on their country's future. So this program is a special program. Our digital producer Maliki is about to tell you why.
Well, every morning we ask our community what stories matter to them and what they're following that they want us to cover. For the past several days, we've gotten a request that look a little something like this one on Facebook. Abdullah wrote to the stream saying, ISIL, the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, overtaking Iraq, prompting an imminent new era. So for those of you at home, we want your questions and comments on this topic as well. Tweet them to us with hashtag AJStream.
So joining us on the set, we have Rayed Jarrah, and Rayed is a political analyst. He's the author of the Iraq War blog and Iraqi Families' Inside View on the first year of occupation. Rayed, it's great to have you here in the stream.
Thank you for having me again.
We will hear you in a little bit. So have a look back here on my laptop. As Malika said, there are so many ways that you can get in touch with us in terms of having an online community conversation. Now this show was actually suggested by a member of our community and you can suggest it really easily as well. Go to facebook.com/AJStream and you too could be in the stream.
So I'm Rasha Latif, I'm an Egyptian American and I'm in the stream.
Can Iraq avoid a sectarian civil war? Since early June, the Sunni armed group ISIL, or the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, has been taking over cities across the country and threatening to march to Baghdad. Part of a larger uprising against the Shia Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, ISIL wants to create a new Islamic state spanning the region. And to do that, fighters have taken over key Iraqi areas, including the second largest city of Mosul, the country's largest oil refinery, and a number of airports, banks and border crossings. This month, UN human rights monitors say that at least 1,075 people were killed in Iraq, most of them civilians. In response, Shia militias and volunteer soldiers are rallying to help Iraqi security forces and protect the government. So amid a Sunni uprising, we wanted to hear what Iraqis think of this current crisis and what they want for their country. To help us talk about this, we have Abdullah Hawez. He's a journalist based in Erbil in the Kurdish region of northern Iraq. We just established our contact with him and he'll be back in just a moment. In Abu Dhabi, we have Mariam Al-Dabar, an independent writer and researcher on Iraq. And in London, we have Fanar Haddad, a research fellow at the National University of Singapore's Middle East Institute. So it's great to have you all here in the stream, everybody. Before we get started, we're going to be talking about ISIL, and I should say that the group is known widely as ISIS. Let's start on my laptop. We just picked out a couple of headlines from today. So starting off with the Washington Post, Shiite villagers describe massacre in northern Iraq. ISIL rebels control Abaji refinery in Iraq. One more here, Sunni insurgents capture more territory in western Iraq. Mariam, if I asked you to write your headline as an Iraqi about what's happening in your country right now, what would you say?
I would definitely be focusing more on the humanitarian crisis that is happening in Iraq. I'm a researcher on Iraqi migration, and so my main concern would be that more than 1 million Iraqis are now displaced and refugees within their own country. This is a catastrophic kind of regression in the current affairs of Iraq. So this would definitely be my main concern.
I'm also looking at your Twitter feed right now, and it's a tweet that you sent out quite recently. It's official, my whole family now are refugees. Tell me the story behind that tweet.
I mean, I come from the city of Mosul. I was born and raised outside of Iraq, but my whole family descends from Mosul. And since the escalation of events that took place in Iraq, most of my family are now displaced. Wow. So we have families in Erbil. Some families have fled outside of Kurdistan as well, and others are considering options in neighboring countries. So it is quite something that touches me close to the heart, obviously, given that I am from the city, but it is official. We are all refugees now.
Rayed, your headline for today as an Iraqi, what would it say?
Before I say the headline, I want to say that I have the exact same story with my family, and I think it's so familiar now with Iraqis that we don't have a single person left in the city that we were born in or lived at. So that is a very, unfortunately, it's a familiar story with millions of Iraqis being displaced.
Where are your family? Where is your family?
All over the world,
Wow.
from the west coast of Canada until New Zealand.
Right.
So it's literally all over the world. For the headline, I will pick what seems to be a really major escalation. There was an attack today in Tel Afar by jet fighters. In the beginning, they thought that the U.S. has bombed Tel Afar with U.S. drones, and now news indicate that these might have been Syrian jet fighters that crossed the border to bomb some areas of Iraqi rebels. This is not confirmed yet, but
Right.
it is definitely an escalation. There are other players who are
And you
jumping
care about
in.
that? Why? Why? Because Mariam was like, it's my family, it's people.
Correct.
You're telling me about something that's involved with the military.
It's more about this conflict becoming truly a regional conflict.
Right.
So it's spilling over. I mean, in the last decade, we have seen how the conflict in Iraq had implications on neighboring countries and how neighboring countries had implications on Iraq.
Sure.
But I would say the last couple of weeks, on the one hand, we saw a few thousand Iranian Revolutionary Guard members coming into Iraq for the first time. Now we see Syrian jet fighters bombing inside Iraq for the first time. So it's just turning into this large regional conflict
Right.
that all countries are interfering in.
Wow. Okay, you've added some complexity to our conversation. Thank you for that, Raed. Our community are saying what?
Well, they're adding their own complexity. You know, you asked for a headline, and so they have questions about the headlines that they're seeing. Tim tweets in, ISIS in Mosul. I'm looking for more detailed story. How much did they take from the city, and how did they do it? Another person, Ramzia, says, are you following the fall of Mosul to ISIS as Kurdish Peshmerga, the Kurdish troops, are being called to help liberate the city? Now, these tweets were from a few days ago, but Abdullah, you, of course, were just near Mosul earlier today. You told our producers ahead of the show that you saw checkpoints there. So can you give us an update on what is actually happening? Abdullah?
Right. Well, Mosul right now, as you know, hello?
Yes, we hear you. Go ahead, Abdullah,
Yeah.
while we've still got the connection.
Okay. Okay.
All right, so we're not
Yeah.
hearing you that well.
Um,
Let me just go back to Fanar here. Fanar, when we were talking about what is it, really the priority, what is your headline for Iraq today, personally? What would it be?
Well, I'd say that the cliched headline of, the end of Iraq or Iraq is unraveling or what have you is today less far-fetched than at any time since 2003. I think this is the biggest existential threat that the Iraqi nation state has faced and the Iraqi state has faced since 2003.
And you mean what by that, Fanar?
I mean that the questions that have been discussed since 2003, often with barely disguised glee about, the territorial configuration of Iraq changing or Iraq breaking apart into, usually ridiculously named entities like Sunnistan and Shiistan. This is now less far-fetched than at any point since 2003. I never held out much prospect for Arab Iraq breaking up,
Right.
but now that seems to be less far-fetched than before.
Fanar, this headline is immense. This is a broadsheet headline, but I hear exactly where you're coming from. I want to show you something. This is quite interesting because a lot of the focus in the last 2 weeks has been on the group ISIL, which we mentioned in the introduction. I want to show you a map of Iraq. There are going to be two little white dots you see, and those two little white dots are Ramadi and Fallujah. Those had two areas that had ISIS presence at the beginning of this year, and then the areas that are popping up we looked at between June the 10th and June the 23rd, so just in 13 days. That is the current or most recent ISIS presence across Iraq. So if we're looking at that as a trend, what do you make of that, Raed?
Well, number one, I want to challenge the conventional wisdom now that this is an ISIS-led, uprising. I think there are many other players that are important to mention. Let me give some historic background and some maybe terrain for who are the main stakeholders in a couple of minutes.
We'll do this briefly because we have 4 people in this conversation and our online community, but it's helpful to have the context.
I can actually let others participate if they want to weigh in as well.
Yeah.
What started as a peaceful demonstration in Hawija and in Fallujah last year turned into these very violent clashes against the government. I don't think anyone argues that ISIS led peaceful demonstrations that looked like Tahrir Square for weeks and weeks in 2 different provinces. So there is definitely a local component in Iraq that represents very legitimate grievances against the central government. Now, with what happened in the last couple of weeks, from indicators on the ground, there are at least 4 other players other than ISIS.
And they are?
The former Iraqi military and Ba'athist and government officials from the Saddam Hussein era, led by Izzat al-Duri. There is a group called Naqshbandiya group. That's one major group. There aren't many of them, but they're very well trained. They have pilots and other
Why
bureaucrats.
is this important?
They are very strong. They know how to run an army, and they have been very actively participating in what has been going on. More importantly, I think the tribal leaders in Iraq have taken a very proactive role in the uprising. The tribes, we're talking about tribes that contain hundreds of thousands of Iraqis, like Dulaim and Jubur, they have been participating in this. And lastly, I would say smaller groups that fought against the U.S. Military presence there, like the Islamic Army in 1940.
All right, so Malika, I heard Mariam say exactly right when you were talking about there's more than ISIS involved in this conversation about Iraq and insecurity right now. So Malika, I'll go to you, but then I also want to hear what she had to say there as well.
Right. Well, you mentioned, Ra'ed, former Iraqi military components. Benjamin wants to know, are Iraqi soldiers running from ISIL, or are they joining them? And what are we not being told about ISIS and their supporters? So, Mariam, I'll go to you with that. What is happening currently with the military? Because in several places it looks like they've stood down.
Well, I'm not in a position to kind of comment on the military. I'm not a military expert, but I have to kind of join my voice with Ra'ed and argue that this simplistic portrayal, and may I argue even reductive portrayal of media of this being only an ISIS-led kind of movement or events in Iraq is quite dangerous, because there are other factors that play on the ground. And the first couple of days of the events, media were adamant on calling it only an ISIS-led sort of...
So Mariam, so let's not waste that time because we're halfway through our show. Tell us what you see it as.
I really do think ISIS is a component of it, but there are other players on the ground. There is the Military Council of the Tribes of Iraq. There is the members of the ex-members of the army, the Iraqi army that was disbanded in after the invasion. And of course, there is the Naqshbandis, which I also agree with Ra'ed. There aren't many, but they are powerful because of their strategic experiences and expertise in understanding Iraq and its dynamics.
All right,
so it's definitely not only ISIS.
Let me just bring in Abdallah here. Abdallah, you're the only person who's sitting in Iraq right now. We're really keen to hear from your perspective what is going on.
I couldn't hear you. Could you repeat the question?
Sure. Abdallah, give us a sense of what is going on from your perspective. You're a journalist, you're based in northern Iraq. Tell us from your perspective, what are you seeing?
Okay. So in Mosul, it's obvious that ISIS is controlling the inside Mosul and some neighboring areas like Talafar, and Peshmerga is controlling the other disputed territories in Mosul and in Kirkuk. There are very limited clashes right now between Peshmerga forces and ISIS fighters, especially in Kirkuk. But in Mosul, it's quite peaceful. There is no, I would say there is no fight, it's quiet. And the situation right now, as I've heard from people inside Mosul who I've talked to many of them, they say the situation is getting better, but they have problems with services like electricity and water. You know, it's very hot right now in Iraq, so they have problems with the services. But aside from that, they say right now they are quite satisfied with the situation, and they are claiming that it's not only ISIS who is controlling the on ground in Mosul. There are other tribal fighters. There are other people from the other like Islamic groups like Mujahideen, Naqshbandi. So, in total, I think most of the people, they are supporting what's going on in Mosul. They don't want the army to go back to Mosul because as they say, they have problems with Al-Maliki. They say he has marginalized Sunnis for a while, as you know. So so far, the situation in Mosul is more in the direction that they would keep they would prefer to be ruled by those armed groups rather than to the Iraqi army to be back.
Interesting. Malika.
Well, Fanar, you heard Abdullah talk about the support in Mosul, but what I want to go through now is these competing hashtags that we're seeing online, support and not so much support from people all around the world. One of the hashtags that we're seeing is no to ISIS, and this is one that popped up not too long ago. This hashtag you can see on my screen here, we covered it not too long ago online. I stand against sectarianism. People all around the world putting up selfies saying that they were against sectarianism and against the infighting. But then on the other hand, you have tweets like this. This is, don't keep calm, start helping your ummah, your Muslim community. And this is a hashtag, all eyes on ISIS. And this is seemingly support for ISIS. So why are we seeing this conflicting message from outside?
Yeah. Well, look, let's not kid ourselves. I mean, as ugly a group as ISIS might seem to all of us, it clearly has support worldwide. They're a minority, but they're a significant minority. The longer we keep sticking our heads in the sand about this, the worse it gets. Just last week, they managed to deploy a Malaysian suicide bomber. There's messages of support flooding into ISIS from as far as Indonesia to Canada and the whole world over, including in Iraq as well. So they certainly have some kind of a social base. I think they're in a minority, but it's a significant minority. Now, to bring it back to Iraq, for me, I think one of the problems is I'm with the others that it's not just ISIS in this, but I think ISIS seems to be the dominant player in this uprising. More worryingly, is that I don't think there's any group that would be open to some kind of negotiations or that's aiming for reform. This isn't an anti-Maliki uprising. I take it to be an anti-post-2003 Iraq uprising. I think the aim is much more ambitious than just getting rid of Maliki. Now, what's truly worrying is that the population seems to be divided almost neatly along sectarian lines as to their views regarding this insurgency, and this reflects views regarding the legitimacy of the state, not the government, the state. For a lot of people, no one likes this government. It doesn't really have any genuine popularity, but for a significant body of Shia opinion, it's a legitimate state, albeit a failing government. Clearly, we've seen over the last 2 weeks, a significant body of Sunni opinion holds the exact opposite, that the state has absolutely no legitimacy and that fighting in its army or deploying its forces or what have you is unforgivable. And this is a very, very deep and very dangerous division in views towards the legitimacy of the state. It's much bigger than Maliki or this current government.
I agree. I mean, it seems that like changing the prime minister will not really change anything now. I heard some calls from the US or other regional countries for Al-Maliki to step down. I don't think that will change anything. Actually, when you think about it, I think Al-Maliki has done an okay job with the parameters that are available to him. But I mean, there aren't many other contenders to replace him who have more popularity.
Who wants to do that job? Okay.
Yeah. So the question is regarding the foundations of the political system, the entire political process in Iraq, whether it's legitimate or not. And now that is divided along sectarian lines.
See, right. I heard, I was reading a Fanar report that described Prime Minister Maliki as the least unpopular Iraqi politician, which is kind of a compliment, kind of. But let's get back to let's get back to Mariam and your family in Mosul, and really where do you go forward from here? I think you've kind of hashed out quite well what the issue is. Abdullah, we hear you. We'll get back to you in just a moment. But Mariam, what would you do going forward? If it's not perhaps replacing a prime minister, what?
Well, I don't agree that Al-Maliki has done a good job. I mean, obviously, the last 8 years, we have seen the highest levels of corruption. Or, I mean, I know you didn't say a good job, but I meant like an okay job. I think Al-Maliki has failed Iraq as a prime minister. However, that is, having said that, that doesn't really solve any of the issues that we're discussing now. I mean, we all have a consensus that we do agree that he has done a slightly bad job in managing the country, but I think a national salvation government is, I would argue, is important. But again, how is that going to come about? We have seen calls from the Ayatollah Sistani and even from Kerry now, from the States, urging Iraq to form a new government and form a new parliament. And these calls are essential because a new government that is, and I'm very aware that my argument might be a little bit reductive, but a government that is inclusive and that can actually answer to some of the
So Mariam, is
demands.
this realistic? How do you get from here today to an inclusive government? Haven't got one so far.
I think, no, we don't have one so far, but I think there are players in the political kind of, I mean, the political in Iraq. There are players that could contend for some sort of a transitional government, sort of, nothing
in a way,
now.
hasn't the last 4 years been probably the most inclusive government in human history, in the sense that everyone was involved? It was a mess of a government because it was a quote-unquote national unity government that meant that no one had the courage to occupy the role of democratic opposition. I mean, I think this inclusivity thing is a bit of a straw man. Well, I think for Maliki to step down would actually be a really good first step, for a simple reason that even were they to hash out a really sensible plan, he's lost all credibility with his opponents. Even if it's the most sensible plan in the world, no one would take it at face value because he simply has lost. I mean, it's like Saddam reaching out to the Shias in the last years of his rule.
So
we just never
wash. It's too late, and nobody will be convinced, right? Just briefly, what did you want to say?
I wanted to comment on. I think Abdullah wants to say something.
Abdullah?
Yeah, there is one thing that I want to add when it comes to Al-Maliki. I think the problem in Iraq is not only Al-Maliki. I mean, of course he's part of it, but he's not like, you cannot blame him for everything. Right. I mean, in Iraq, it was obvious, even before Al-Maliki, after the invasion in 2003, even before that, there has been sectarian problems in Iraq. I would say with the creation of Iraq, there has been sectarian problems back in 1921. So I would say Maliki has deepened the problem, has deepened the sectarian division, but he's not the only one to be blamed. I mean, Sunnis also should be blamed. Sunnis for some time they have asked more than what they deserve.
Right.
Sunnis has also boycott the political life. Sunnis has also took arm against the government that they participated in it. I mean, of course, Maliki is part of the problem, but he's not.
But not the only
whole.
problem.
I mean,
Abdullah.
Yeah, all the players, Sunnis and Shias, and everyone should be blamed for the crisis in Iraq.
Okay, so you're listening to Abdullah Hawez. He's a journalist. He's based in Kurdish-controlled North Iraq. We also have Fanar Haddad and Mariam Al-Dabar and Raed Jarrah. They have not finished speaking yet. You can hear them all piping up. It always happens in the last 5 minutes of the show. Okay, conversation hasn't ended. I'm going to take that conversation to stream.aljazeera.com to be continued. In the meantime, let me tell you about the next A-Day stream. Babies growing up behind bars. We look at the controversy surrounding US prison nurseries and their impact on mothers and children. Stay with us. The post show is next at stream.aljazeera.com, and if you're watching on TV, you can catch us on YouTube a little bit later. See you online. Hello again, this is the Stream's online post show. We're talking about the current Sunni uprising in the country. So let's get right back to that conversation. This is quite intriguing because when we talk about Iraq, Malika, it's so easy to get carried away with how many challenges there are. There's been a lot of time talking about the challenges. Don't talk about, okay, so now what do we do? That's something that our community have picked up on though.
Right, exactly. Lots of them sending in their suggestions. Now, Maryam mentioned a national salvation government. There's another idea here. This is in the form of a video comment, and it's sent to us from someone who sent it from northern Iraq, the Kurdish region of northern Iraq. So have a listen to this.
My point of view is I agree with the Joe Biden scenario or option that he suggested to Congress, dividing Iraq into three main regions: Kurdistan, Sunni state, Shia state, because that might help to avoid return Iraq to sectarian or tribal fighting in the future. If you don't divide Iraq, it might be a problematic situation faced with the nations in Iraq forever.
So he mentions a 2006 plan from then Senator Joe Biden about breaking up Iraq. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, the 2006 plan didn't come out of a vacuum. There was a very strong political and military agenda to partition Iraq at that time. Iraq witnessed one of the largest ethnic and sectarian cleansing campaigns in the region. Millions of Iraqis were moved out of their homes, and now we have new demographic realities where we can call a province a Sunni province and the Shia province. These things didn't really exist with these lines in the sand before. This is one of the agendas in Iraq. Some Sunnis and some Shiites and some Kurds have been calling for the end of Iraq as a united one state, and separating the 3 or 4 divisions into new states. I mean, but there are other people who would like to keep the country as one united country. Even now among the players.
Where's the majority feeling? One country or split?
I mean, it's not easy to have a poll in Iraq, but the latest polls that came from the country, there was an overwhelming majority who wanted to continue living in one united country. This has been, it's been a few years since the last poll happened. One point I want to make is that the different stakeholders that we mentioned within the Sunni rebellion actually have different points of view. So you have someone like ISIL who don't believe in the state of Iraq as a nation state. They want to destroy it and create their own little nation state that goes across borders. And then you have very hyper nationalists, Iraqi nationalists, like former Baathists or other groups who believe in Iraq as one united country. So there is the spectrum exists, I think, in each of the groups.
Abdallah, what did you want to add?
Yes. Yeah, I want to say something here. I mean, I would say the majority in Iraq right now, they want the partition of Iraq because there may be people who does not want to express it. I mean, they've been living in a country called Iraq, especially the Arabs, not the Kurds. They may not be like, they may not want to say it like directly, but I would say right now the majority of Iraqis, Sunni, Shia, and Kurds support the partition in Iraq. I mean, my evidence here is that Sunnis right now, they are supporting the Sunni groups who are in total control of the Sunni areas. Shias are supporting the Shia group in the south, and Kurds they have their own land. I mean, it's obvious that their actions say that they want a divided Iraq, and I mean, I would say this is the solution for Iraq. Iraq cannot restore. Iraq cannot become a unified country. It's very, very difficult. I mean, right now the problem is not only political, it has rooted, like it has become also social and economical. Even socially, Sunnis and Shiites cannot live together anymore. It has become very different, which is very, very, I would say, difficult to reunite this country.
If I may jump in on this point, for me, this whole question of Iraqi nationalism and you know, whether Iraq can hold or whatnot, and it's a question that's been asked since 2003. I've always split, in my head, I've always split Kurdish Iraq from Arab Iraq. And I think this is why the Biden plan was so popular with Kurds, because they have their own imagination for what a state a Kurdish state. They have always been reluctant partners in Iraq. They always dreamt of independence, and they see it as their right, and best of luck to them. But in Arab Iraq, the mythology of Iraqi nationalism still holds. Now today, Abdullah is absolutely right that, it seems the Sunnis are controlling their areas and the Shias are controlling theirs. And out of fear, if for no other reason, that feeling is growing, that let everyone control their areas. However, the desire really is to control the whole. And that's been one of the problems between Sunni and Shia politicians. It's different visions for what Iraq means. A Shi'i-centric Iraqi nationalism or a Sunni-centric Iraqi nationalism. But it's Iraqi nationalism nonetheless. And it's that struggle to control the whole rather than secede, which is why the Kurdish case is exceptional in Iraq. And we've had not a single realistic or prominent call for secession from Arab Iraq.
There is one thing.
ISIS aside.
There is one thing that I want to say here. There is one thing. I mean, they are not saying it, but I mean, someone like ISIL Nujati, who is the governor of Mosul, and they are very powerful Sunni leaders in Iraq. They are asking for a Sunni region. I mean, this is a gradual secession of the country. This is a gradual partition. I mean,
that's federalism. Federalism is not the same as division.
I agree.
All right,
yeah,
I'm going to take that opportunity to jump back in with the community. So Abdullah, there's pushback from two of our guests. Let's see what the community has to say.
Well, speaking strategically and actually what could actually happen right now, Hassan writes in, now that we know how tough ISIL is, military operations can't possibly stop them. Maliki needs to give in to their initial request. So Raed, does that make sense, and is the answer a military solution? Is it a political solution? So what is the actual inevitability that we can see happen the next few days and weeks?
I don't think anyone has like an answer with the silver bullet that will stop violence, but I think the first step is to recognize that there are other partners across the table that we can talk to, and the fact that the Iraqi government and the US government keep on calling all of the groups who are behind the uprising ISIL is a no-starter for dialogue. I think recognizing the other partners who might actually be invited to sit around the table is definitely the first step to move forward.
Are you talking about former Baathists? Are you talking about other countries? Who are
all
these
of
other?
them.
Okay.
So I think I'm talking about the internal ones. So the ones that I explained briefly earlier, whether they are the former Baathists or the tribal leaders or other stakeholders behind the uprising. It doesn't seem like there is any recognition of their presence, let alone an invitation for them to participate in an inclusive governance system.
I want to share with all of our guests, just bear with me guests, just a moment. I want to share with all of our guests something that I saw in the New York Times today and CBS News poll. And it says here, has Barack Obama clearly explained what the United States goals are in Iraq or not? We have clearly explained 23%, hasn't clearly explained 67%, and 10% have no opinion. So I am intrigued as to Fanar and Mariam, who is smiling right now. So I'll start with Mariam. What do you make of this? And does it even matter? What business is it of the American public to have an opinion on what's happening in Iraq?
No, I mean, every public is entitled to an opinion. Everybody is entitled to an opinion, but the idea of what the United States is doing and where it's what the position is, I really feel like I stand between the 67 and the 10%, because there has been some sort of like an American performance in the last 2 weeks of back and forth between we are going to support the Iraqi government, but we're not going to be involved, but we are not going to collaborate with Iran, but we might, but Iran would come back and say we might consider collaborating with the United States. So I'm pretty much with the idea, with the notion that the kind of the intentions or the American position is not as clear, crystal clear as people might think it is.
I agree. It's very confusing and confused. I question the notion of the question regarding.
You question the notion of the question.
Yeah, which is that Obama has a clear intention, but he has failed to explain it to the public. I don't even think he has a plan, because like when you look at the Obama administration's policy in Syria, which is against the Syrian regime and supporting some of the rebels, it's exactly the opposite policy in Iraq, which is supporting the regime against the armed rebels. And these actually, the Iraqi regime and the Syrian regime are allies, and the rebels from both sides of the border are allies. So it's very confusing. You know, when you look at Iran's policy in Iraq, although I'm against it, but at least it makes sense. They support the Iraqi regime, they support the Syrian regime. From their geopolitical point of view, it makes sense. The US policy does not make any sense.
I think you do. I think you do a great injustice to Bashar al-Assad's barbarity to put the Maliki government and Bashar al-Assad's government on the same level of brutality. I think you do an injustice to Bashar al-Assad's barbarity. But I mean, the Obama administration, with regards to the recent crisis, has been true to form. I mean, it's not just about
I'm going to ask you to leave that sentence there, because I just want to get in to see what Abdullah has to say, because I'm way over time right now. Abdullah, just leave us with a closing thought. What did you want to add?
There's about the American policy. I would say it's true that it's a very unclear policy and very confusing.
Okay.
But I would say Americans are very reluctant because they don't know what's going on in Iraq. I mean, they don't know whether it's ISIL who is controlling, whether it's a Sunni revolution. So it's very difficult for them to.
So the confusion is based on some merit there. Okay, all right. So Rayed and Mariam and Fanar and Abdullah, I've enjoyed having this conversation with you. It is by no means over. The situation in Iraq is by no means over. Have a look here at my laptop. If you go to live.aljazeera.com, you'll see our live blogs for the Iraq live blog. You'll be able to keep up with all the latest there. So let's move on with our very next program. Confined cells, convicted criminals and despair. These are just a few of the harsh realities of prison life. So why allow babies to live in these conditions? We look at the controversy surrounding US prison nurseries, but that will be on the next show. See you online.